an order, learning how to make an order ahead app using Square. Today we're going to be talking about how to use Square's APIs and how to actually combine those into this like singular experience that we refer to as order ahead. And so what we're going to do is we're going to run through what placing an order, seeing it in the order manager, and using our example application, and then go through all the different APIs we're using. But it's probably worthwhile for me to cover exactly what an order ahead app really is. So an order ahead app is a way for you to place an order on a website, and then you go either pick it up or you have it delivered to you. And so we're all probably familiar with this, with using something like DoorDash or Postmates, or even just going to a business's website and then placing an order and going and picking it up. And so we're going to actually show how you can actually build that experience using our APIs and our SDKs. And then the other part of this is this tool called Order Manager. And so Order Manager is this feature within Square's point of sale, but it's also in the web dashboard. But it's a way to manage all the orders that come into a business. And so sellers can then use that to look in there and see what orders need to be prepared, which ones are ready to get picked up, and they have all the details for contacting their customers. And it makes it really easy for them to be able to see exactly what orders need to be made. So typically, a seller would have a connection with, say, all of these different shipping providers like DoorDash and Postmates and whatever. And in order to facilitate all of those incoming orders, they actually need to go have a bunch of tablets connected with each one of these providers. And so they usually have somebody sitting in the back there just kind of bouncing around, getting notifications, trying to see what orders they need to be preparing for an order coming in. And Order Manager is this tool that allows you to centralize all of that into the point of sale so that the seller no longer has to use all these different tablets. They can actually just manage everything in this one single place where they're already taking all their payments. So let's actually go start walking through the demo of what this looks like. So for everyone who's here and participating, couple prerequisites that you're going to want to make sure that you have taken care of. First, you're going to make sure that you have a Square developer account. If you don't, you can go to developer.squareup.com/apps, and then it will walk you through getting your account set up. So just make sure that you have that ready. And then there's a bunch of other little links that you can see in the Discord chat. Make sure that you follow those in order to see additional resources. We're going to be walking through this app that I've kind of modified the original in order to work here within Glitch. A couple things that I'll probably walk through really quick, kind of like housekeeping things with this application. Because I modified this slightly, you find we have our documentation linked there. You can actually go there for the full walkthrough of using this application. Because I modified this for Glitch, there's a couple things that won't work right out of the box. And part of it is that I took everything that you would find here in the config.json and I moved it into a .env file. If you're not familiar with what either of those things are, you'll see the guide in the actual repository for guides on how to update this stuff. But this is the stuff that you need from your developer account, where you get your application ID and your access token. And so there's certain other parts of the project. So this is all just a Node Express application. And so there's a couple commands that you can run here. I've modified this start one to just use sandbox, but typically would be in production. And then there's also this really, really helpful command here. So if you're using the actual app and you put your credentials here in the config.json, there's a seed script that we've created in here. And so you can use this to actually seed your account with some information so that when you walk through the entire application, you'll be able to see everything showing up. So in order to do that, let's actually make this bigger. If anybody can't see anything, feel free to just drop a message. I'm happy to make things a little bit more legible. But let's just make that better. Great. So in order to run this command, you would just run your command line terminal at the root of the project. Give this 1 second. But you would just run npm run and then seed here. And as long as you have all of your credentials in the config.json, there's a script that's actually, fortunately, this is going kind of slow on my end. There we go. So, well, actually, we're just going to go ahead and close up the terminal there. So there's a script in this utilities. No, actually, I believe this is where it is. But effectively, there's a script here. When you run npm run seed, it'll actually look into, okay, it's in the bin folder. But it'll actually run this this seed catalog. And what that's going to do is that actually just creates a bunch of catalog objects. And that's pretty important so that when you actually load the application, you'll see something show up. So we've covered all of those like minor housekeeping things. If anybody wants me to go back and cover it again, please feel free to just drop a question in Discord. And I'm happy to go back and cover it again. So let's go and take a look at the application. So here within Glitch, you can always like show side by side. I'm going to actually put it in its own tab just because the UI is designed to be like a full screen. So right here we have the first page of our order ahead application. And so here we're actually looking at the catalog of everything that I have in my restaurant. So this is all a fake restaurant that we put together in my Sandbox account. And so each one of these is a different menu item that I can have. And if you click on it, we can see all the different things that we can order for that. I'm feeling like having a cheeseburger, so we're just going to go ahead and click on that and then click buy this. And so all of this information here is actually populated from the seller catalog. And so that's actually just saying like, this is a cheeseburger that I have. That's the description I've put, the image I've associated with it. And when we click buy this, we're actually going to go into the order portion of this. And so here's where we're actually going to be constructing an order on the back end. And so the first step is we want to say what kind of fulfillment we want for an order. And so here we're saying like, do we want it to be pickup or do we want it to be delivery? So I'm going to go ahead and pick pickup. And so what this does is this is now going to take me to the next step where I need to fill in all the details of my fulfillment. So here I'm picking a different pickup time, and then I'm going to put in a name, and then it's important that we have this name and either a phone number or an email because this information is actually going to show up in the order manager for a seller. And so we want to make sure that they have information to contact whoever's supposed to be picking this up. So let's go ahead and put in a phone number. And then we're going to go ahead and click continue to payment. And so this has now created the order for us, but it's not quite paid for. And so we need to actually do the next step. So the next step is actually paying for the order. So we can see that here's all our pricing. We have some discounts that are put into our order. And so now we're using the payment form here. And this is actually provided by Square. So you implement this payment form in order to securely capture these card details and then process them. And so we're just going to put in the test credentials here. And then those don't matter. We just need to make sure that they're valid. And so then we are actually going to pay for our order. And so we also have some functionality here for loyalty, but we don't really have that configured. So we're going to kind of skip that. But if you ever get interested, you can always feel free to tinker around in the repo to get that set up. And then I'm going to go ahead and click pay with card. And so what this is doing is now creating a payment and then linking that to the order that we created in the previous step. And so these two things are required if we want to be able to make that order show up in the order manager. So now we see we have all the order details. It's status of proposed since we've just placed it. So let's go take a look at what the order manager looks like. And so in order to look at the order manager, we're going to go into our Sandbox seller dashboard. What this is basically like your test environment for what the seller would be seeing in their own production environment. And so we're going to go ahead into the default test account. I'm going to click open. And then now we're actually looking at the Square Sandbox seller dashboard. We'll give that a few seconds to load. And so now we can actually see this is kind of like a simplified version of what you would normally see if you signed into a regular Square account. And we're going to go ahead and click Orders. And we're going to see that we have a new order here. So this is the order that we actually just placed. So let's go ahead and click on it and look at the details. And so this is actually what a seller would do in order to fulfill this. So they see that, they have, here's an order and it's for pickup and it's placed at this location, which is the default test account. And then here's the pickup details. So this is who's going to be picking up my order, when, and then the phone number if I need to contact them. And so as I want to prepare my order, I can say that, hey, I mark it in progress, and that indicates that I'm actually working on it. And then you can click this again to mark it that it's ready. And then once it's ready, then we're just actually waiting for somebody to come pick it up. And then after they pick it up, we finish it out by just marking that it's picked up. And so now we have a fully completed order. And then we can take a peek at our transaction details, which is going to just show the payment that's actually like linked to this order. So we can see all of the payment information here. And we see our bacon cheeseburger. Let's actually make this a little bit bigger. So we can see all the details for our payment there. So that's a quick overview of like what the application looks like and what kind of like that user experience is. But I'm sure that you're all wanting to actually see, okay, how do we actually like dig in and like make all of the API calls to power this? And so let's go back to the first step. And so one of the first things that you're going to actually want, before I even talk about the catalog, is one of the things that happens when the page is initially loading is it's actually fetching your location. And so you're able to find your location in your developer dashboard by just going into your application, and we can look at our locations. And then we can see this is what my location ID is. So I'm just going to keep this right here because this is important to use later. But that's like the very first thing, is that it's actually looking at what is the location that we're pulling all of this information from. And then that's how we're actually seeing this information up here. The next step is actually pulling in a catalog. And so we see that we have all of the different catalog items here. And we see that we get the detail of each one. So in order to get this information, there's a couple different endpoints that you can actually call. So here I'm actually looking at our API Explorer. If you're ever wanting to get there, you can always find it in our technical reference, but it's linked all throughout our documentation. And this is actually a really useful tool for essentially playing with our API, because you can actually see what are all the different fields I can call. You can put in the correct information, and then we can run these calls to look at the responses. And we're not having to like pull up Postman or write any code. We can just start entering information in. And so the first two different ways that you can actually pull up all of the catalog information is either, let's actually make this just a little bit bigger for everyone. We can actually either use the search catalog objects endpoint or the list catalog endpoint. So this one's going to be a little bit more basic. So if we ran this, we can actually see this is going to just return everything that's within my catalog. And so we're going to see a lot of different things here. Probably stuff that we don't even really need. And so my recommendation is to actually always use the search catalog objects endpoint. This one gives you a little bit more control over what you're actually going to be returning. And so we'll say that I want to include my related objects. And we're going to say of the object types that we want to return, let's just return the items. And so we'll go ahead and run that. Forgive my latency, taking a little bit for that to respond. And then here we can actually see now we have all of the things that we were seeing on that page. So these are all the items that are in my account. And if you ran that same script that I mentioned earlier for seeding the account, you would see this same information in your test account. And so we can see that we have a bacon cheeseburger here. And then we have all the descriptions, and then there's additional calls that you can make for fetching these images to actually display those. So we're going to actually like walk through this next step on how to actually create this order that we saw within the application. So I'm going to keep this open here so I can grab that ID later. But let's actually open up a new tab. And so we know that that a second. We know that we want to create an order. So we have our catalog item, we have our location. So now we're ready to go create an order. And so that's the same as like if we click on here and we click by this, the first step that we see in the UI here is actually selecting our fulfillment. So let's go over to the orders API, and we're going to go ahead and create an order. And so in order to create that order, first thing we want to generate is an item potency key. So I'll take a quick minute to sort of explain what this is. We have some videos on our YouTube channel, and that's at youtube.com/squaredev. I'm sure somebody from my team will be kind enough to drop that in the Discord for anyone. If you want to learn more about item potency, we have an hour-long sandbox show where you can learn about that in more depth, even outside of the context of Square. But item potency is this concept of when you do an action, you expect that it'll only ever happen once. And so even if you were going to do multiple requests with the same information, you only ever want that to happen once. And the reason that that's important is that, give me one second, I'm getting a couple questions here. And so the reason that item potency is important and we only ever want something to happen once is you can imagine that like if you're taking a payment or you're creating an order and you might be running a request multiple times and you maybe didn't get a response and you don't know, did this actually go through? This lets you continually replay that request, and then you're going to have the confidence of knowing that it only ever happens once. And so the reason that becomes more and more important is you don't want to have multiple payments or multiple orders or create multiple catalog items. And so this is a way to control for that, even if you were going to be running multiple requests. So here, we're actually just generating a UUID. So this is just like a unique string of alphanumeric characters separated by dashes. And so that allows us to sort of guarantee that there's going to be a unique request here. So let's go back and we're going to grab our location ID since that's the next thing we need for an order. And then let's actually look at the order object. So we can either set it here or here. I'm going to actually put it here since it says that it's required. And then the next thing that we're going to do is the fulfillment. So that's the very first thing we saw here. So we said we're going to go ahead and click pickup. And so that'll load this other page where we see the details. So let's go back and say we want to create our fulfillment now. And so the first thing that we're going to need is since we're creating a first we want to set we're doing a pickup. And then we're going to say like, okay, since we're doing a pickup, we want to fill out the pickup details field here. So we'll go ahead and click add. And then part of that is that we want to fill out our recipient information. So let's go ahead and click add that. And you'll notice here and even up above, there's a customer ID. We're not using this in this application, but it's pretty important to mention because there's a whole other customers API where you can actually manage all of this customer profile information. And if you actually just provide the customer ID here, it'll actually fill out everything else as long as that information's on that customer. So we're just going to go ahead and put in a new name, and we're actually just going to put in the same phone number as we had before. And then one more requirement that we actually have is that we need to say when this is being picked up. So here we can put in a full timestamp, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm actually just going to go ahead and put one for tomorrow. So let's go ahead and put, do I have that correct? Let's actually put it for the 17th. So we're going to go ahead and just do a truncated date. So normally you want to put as much precision into this time as possible. But just for simplicity, we're going to go ahead and put that in. And then now that we have our fulfillment, we need to actually fill out the rest of our order. And so the next thing that we want to cover is in line items. So this is how we actually, whenever you see something on a receipt, each one of those things on the receipt is going to be considered a line item. And so we want to go ahead and say that we're going to do 1 cheeseburger. And then we need our catalog object ID. And you can see that it requires that this is an item variation. So let's go back to our catalog and we can see Within this cheeseburger, we have one variation. So we're just going to go ahead and grab that ID. We're going to put that in the catalog object ID. Now, if you wanted to, you can actually put like inline information. If you just wanted to say like create, your own cheeseburger thing, you could put in a name and then a quantity, or actually you could just put in a name. But since we put in this catalog object ID, it's actually just going to pull all this information in from the catalog into the order line item here. So now that we have our order with our location, our fulfillment, our line items, we should actually be good to create this order. Let's go ahead and run that request. And we can see that we now have our order. And it has our fulfillment information with all of our recipient information. And one other thing that we're going to want to note here is what actually the total money. And yes, we want the total money, which is going to be $9.95. Now, this is important later because the next step is we're going to go ahead and create a payment and then link this order to that payment. And so let's go ahead and then open up a new tab and pull up the Create Payments endpoint. And so let's go over to Payments, and then we're going to go ahead and click Create Payment. And so the reason that we wanted to remember that number before, we want to put in the exact amount that the order is for here. So that's going to be $9.95. Now, the amount inside of this field is always going to be the lowest division of a currency. So in this case, we're going to be using USD. And so this is going to be in cents. So that's $9.95. And this is going to hold true for every other currency. Whatever the lowest denomination of that currency is, that's what this is going to be representing. And then we're going to want to generate another item potency key to make sure that this is a unique request and it doesn't get duplicated. And then we're going to go ahead and set a source ID. Now, earlier, let's go ahead and quickly go to the next page. So we had talked about earlier about the payment form. And so the payment form does this very important job of grabbing all this secure credit card information. And then in order to process with that information, we give you back what is called a nonce. And you can kind of just think of a nonce as a pointer to that secure information that we've collected. So this allows you to not have to touch any kind of sensitive information. And there's a very good reason that you don't want to do that. Because if you did have to touch that sensitive information, you're under a lot of regulatory requirements with the credit card companies to make sure that you're storing and handling that information in a secure manner. And by using our payment form, you circumvent all of that. You can rely on Square to actually be handling all of that compliance stuff. And so when I'm hitting all of my credit card details in here with the test account, I'm actually then just generating a nonce. And then that nonce is going to be sent to our backend. And so here, when we're creating a payment, that's where we would put our nonce, is in the source ID field. But since we're not using the payment form in the API Explorer, we can actually just use one of these test values, which is cnon *nonce OK. And so this will actually just provide us a nonce value that we can always use in Sandbox in order to run this. And so the next thing that we want to do is probably put in our order ID. So let's go back to our order. We'll grab that order ID. And then we will put that in here. And so now we have an amount that matches the total amount for the order, the item potency key, the source ID, and then the order ID. Another thing worth just reminding about the amount being the exact amount for the order is if we don't have the exact amount for the order, what ends up happening is that we end up with an order that isn't completed because we don't have enough money to consider the order paid. So that's why it's important to have this total match that. And the reason it won't do it automatically, like say that you omitted that total money, is because sometimes you can actually have multiple payments for a single order. That's actually pretty common if you can imagine that someone had a gift card and they wanted to say pay $5. They only had $5 on their gift card, but the burger is $9.95. So you can collect that $5, and then you can ask for another form of payment for the rest of the $4.95. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and run that request. And we can see that we've gone ahead. Let's pull that out. And we can see that we have a payment. It's completed. And it's referencing our order ID. So this means that we actually have the order created, and it should be showing up in our order manager, even though we just ran this all through our API Explorer. So let's go ahead and take a look back in our Sandbox Seller dashboard. So if we go here, we can take a look at orders. And you see that we have a new order, and it's matching the name that we put in there. And then it has all the details that we've put in from before. So we can see like who's picking it up, when they're picking it up. And then we have the phone number there. And so we'll go ahead and skip this through. And we can see that's how every one of those requests that we saw in that overall experience from before is actually making this all work. So that's pretty neat. So let's actually then now go take a look at the application itself. And I maybe want to just ask a quick question of anybody who's in here and watching. Is anybody here familiar with Node.js or built with Node.js before? I'll take the lack of chat as a maybe. So anybody who's not familiar with Node.js, this application is kind of built it is built using Express. And the pattern that's used here is what's called an MVC. So it's a model view controller pattern. And so this is the root of our application here, where everything is kind of being pulled together and then starting our server. And the important part, so you can see that we're pulling in Express, and then this is a lot of what is called middleware for helping to process our requests. And then where the interesting part actually starts is here. So that's actually where the root of our application is going to be. So that's the initial path. So when we are here, we can see that our path, we are just at the slash. And so we'll take a look at what ends up loading there. But in order to find that out, we actually need to go look into the routes. The routes. And so if we look in the index, and this is actually just a peculiarity of Node.js, the root of any folder is going to be at the index.js. So we can look in here, and it seems to be in a different kind of order, but we can see that the root is actually here. So this is everything that's pulling into our router. And the root of our URL scheme is going to be right here. And you can see that here, the API calls that are happening are kind of exactly what I mentioned before. So this is using our Node SDK. And so that's actually, you can see up here, we're pulling in things from the Square Connect client. This has actually been sort of abstracted away, but you can see the different APIs that we're calling. So there's catalog, location, and orders. And for the root of our application, oh, interesting. Sorry to get distracted here, but I'm glad to hear that somebody else is using Nest.js. I've actually been using Nest.js recently. Unfortunately, this particular app is not in Nest.js because our SDK does not currently support TypeScript. And I usually build all of Nest.js applications using TypeScript. But yeah, it has a very similar, Nest.js uses Express under the hood, unless you kind of choose something else. And so back to the root of our application is we have here that we're pulling in the locations using the locations API. And then here we're actually pulling in the catalog. And so we're actually just doing a list catalog, like I mentioned. My personal preference is to use search catalog objects. But I think that when this was written, list catalog was the main endpoint to be using. And then after that is actually just going to then render the view. So like I mentioned before about a model view controller setup, The view is kind of like what you see in terms of a presentation. So this right here is kind of what we would consider our controller. So we can actually go look at our views in the views folder, and you can actually see like this is going to pull up the index. And then now this is actually passing in all of this data. So we can see that we actually have, it's for each item. So like here, we're parsing out all the items that we had. So let's actually quickly hop back. So we can see like what data is actually being passed into the view here. So we have these items, which is actually pulling everything in the items or from the catalog list. And then we're actually then pulling in the location info. And so it's actually just fetching that first location that it returns here. So if we look in the view, we can actually see that, here for each item in that array of items, we're then going to grab the item and the object ID, and then it's going to pull out the image URL. So that's actually how we see the images there. And then I'm going to have to Command F to actually see where we're pulling in the location. And so there we're actually then putting in the location ID for that item. So that's actually how like the root of our application works. And so the next step is we're actually then creating the order. So let's go back to our router. And then we actually want to look at, so this is going to be in the create order route. And so we can see that when we click on this and we click buy this, it's going to take us to checkout actually. So let's actually do that. You should look at the checkout route. And so here we're actually it's pulling in something from the checkout file. So if we look in here, we can actually see that it's going to say how we're sort of making our next calls. And so here we're actually choosing our delivery options. And so you can see here, this is where we're actually pulling in our orders and our location. Actually, I think the important thing, so if we chose delivery, this is actually what would end up getting called. But we actually chose pickup. So let's actually look in here for choose delivery pickup. And then here we're pulling in the order ID, the location ID, and the fulfillment type. And you can see that the fulfillment type is matching pickup. And then it's going to actually then redirect over to this add pickup details route. And then it's injecting all of that data into the route URL so it can actually be picked up by it. So let's actually go find out where the add pickup details route is. So if we look in add pickup details, we're filling out this form here. We're saying that, okay, we're going to do a pickup. And so here it's going to do that redirect that I just mentioned. And then it's actually, we have all of these fields for pickup time, pickup name, pickup phone number, pickup email. And then that's actually the info that's going to get posted. So it's actually rendering this template here. And then if we fill it out, I'm pretty sure that it posts it back to us. And if you ever want to find out, let's actually make this bigger. And so you can actually always look in your network in order to see, but if we click continue the payment, we can actually see that it's going to call add pickup details and post all that data there. So if we look in here, let's look for another route that matches this. And so we see add pickup details route. And we can actually see what all information it accepts. So here it's pulling out some of these from the body of the request. So it's looking for the order ID, location ID, item potency key, and then the name, email, phone number, and then the time. And so here we're then doing that orders API call like we did in the API Explorer, but we're actually just running this in JavaScript. And so it's using the batch retrieve orders to go fetch that initial order that was created. And then now it's actually then updating that order. And so it's going to add in the location ID. And then this is all of our fulfillment information that we filled out. So it's going to have the type of pickup, the state is going to be proposed, and then all of our pickup details put in there. And then this is actually some code that's just added in for the example application. So we didn't do this in the API Explorer, but then it's then adding in these discounts for doing a curbside pickup. And so then after that, it's going to just redirect you with all this data again over to checkout. And so this is when we're actually going to check out and pay for the order. So let's actually look for the payment endpoint. So here we go. We have router.get/payment. And so that's after so this is basically where we ended up getting redirected to. Let's close that out so it's a little bit easier to read. And so this is actually going to then render the payment page using all of that data. So if we want to look at that, it's going to be in the views under checkout and then payment. And so this is pretty, complicated looking, but what this essentially is building our payment form. And so if you want to know more about the payment form, I believe Havenwood has actually gone ahead and linked that in the Discord chat. There's stuff that you can see for creating a payment in the API Explorer. That'll also lead you off to docs for building with our payment form. The things that are important to kind of call out here when building with the payment form is that you want to load using this URL on your page. This will actually pull in the JavaScript directly from us. We require that you do it that way. And so that makes sure that you're pulling in the latest of that payment form. And then the rest of this is actually just putting that into the fields. And then, forgive me, I don't usually look at this in template format. I usually look at it as in HTML. So we can see that here's the credit card form as it's created here. And so these are all the fields that are being specified for the payment form to target to replace with iframes. And if you're not familiar with iframes, thank you for posting that video. That video will actually give a much better explanation of how to build the payment form, so I don't have to go into so much detail here. But basically, these are all the fields that will get replaced so that we can securely grab that information. And so let's go back to here, and we can see what ends up happening when we process a payment. And so let's look at the post method. So after we actually fill out all of the details here, we put in the credit card number and all that stuff, and we click pay with card, it's then going to actually post it to this endpoint. And so there we're going to get that order, the location, item potency key, and then the all-important nonce that I mentioned earlier. So this is going to be that unique nonce, and then we can see that it's being used down here when we create a payment as the source ID. So instead of using a test value, we actually have a generated nonce. Now, because we're using Sandbox throughout, and I had actually put in a test credit card number here, it's actually going to be generating a Sandbox nonce, but that's still going to be sort of treated like you're still going to see a unique value, because every time you generate a nonce, it's going to be unique to every single time that somebody you request one. Because by definition, I probably should have covered this earlier, by definition, a nonce is a single-use token. And so as soon as you use the token, you cannot use it again. The reason that's important is because if you're just doing a one-time payment, you use the nonce and then you can't reuse it. But if you wanted to say, get credit card information and charge something more than once, you can actually just create a card on file for a customer. And then that's, you use that nonce and you can't use it again, but now it's associated with a customer profile, and you can use that to make payments in the future. So if we had user authentication set up here, we can actually link it to the customer profile. And so that ends up creating the payment, which ends up putting it into the order manager. And then that's basically, I think the final page is just the order confirmation page. And so that's just going to take all of the details that we saw from before. Let me actually see. one second while I find this. Excellent question from Patrick. Do we have to use Square's form, or can we just get JSON data and create our own form? That's actually a really good question. So you do have to use Square's payment form. And the reason that you don't want to just get JSON data and create your own form is that it would mean that you're collecting those credit card details yourself, and then trying to transmit them from a customer's browser or mobile device, and then pulling it back into your servers. Now, it might not seem like it's a problem if you might think like, oh, like I'm pulling that in and then I'm immediately making a call back to Square. But the thing is that there's evidence of that credit card details will kind of permeate within your system unless you're very, very careful about how you're managing that. Because as you pull it into your system, it's going to get written to a hard drive somewhere, or it might get logged, or it might exist in some other way. And so that's the reason that you actually just want to use our payment form, but also it's also why we require that you have to use our payment form. So in order for us to make sure that you're PCI compliant, you have to use our payment form. And Havenwood also excellently points out there's other ways to get nonces. So there's like the in-app payments SDK. So if you were like building for mobile, you can actually use the in-app payments SDK to do that. And even if you're using cross-platform like React Native or Flutter, under the hood, we have plugins for both of those platforms. But under the hood, it's actually using the in-app payments SDK, and that behaves effectively like our payment form, where it will securely grab those details, it'll give you back a nonce, and then you use that to process payments going forward. And so, yeah, so we'll look at the order confirmation really quick, just to say, like, when we get to this page, it's going to grab the order ID and the location, and then it's actually just going to render that order confirmation template using the information of that order and location. So if we look at the order confirmation page, pretty straightforward, because it's actually just saying like, okay, it's going to include this pickup information, and then it's just going to render all of the info from that order. And that is at a very basic level how this application works. If you were wanting to, if anyone's interested, I can quickly run through how you would modify this to work in, like, say you remix this glitch app. If you wanted this to work with your own tool, we would actually just go ahead and comment that out. In fact, because I'm changing this, it'll probably make it so if you remix it going forward, so it'll work correctly. So I'm going to just change this to actually pull in the env. And then now, if you wanted to actually run this particular, it's going to take a minute to probably reload. If you wanted to run that particular command I mentioned earlier to seed your account, you just pull up the terminal here, and then now you could run npm run seed, and it will run the seeding command. And I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to cover in the workshop. I mean, I want to leave it open for any other questions that anyone might have. I know I covered a lot of material end to end. There's a lot of different use cases that you can actually use Square for. So like this is just one very narrow case, but we wanted to demo this one because it uses so many different APIs in tandem in order to create this unique experience of just placing an order at somebody's restaurant. And it's probably also worth me plugging. So we recently also just did the general availability of our terminal API. And that's probably like one of the coolest. I mean, I think that all the things that we're doing are cool, but our terminal API is really awesome. It's a device. I actually have one here. I don't know if everyone can see. I'm going to verify on Twitch. Okay, so you wouldn't be able to see this, but we have a terminal device that allows you to, thank you so much, Havenwood. We have our terminal API, and this actually connects you to some of our hardware. So we also have like Reader SDK, but terminal API is the coolest one because it's so simple, and it can work from any internet connected device. So if you just created a backend anywhere, you can have a front end that kind of like you can take commands from and then create payments using the terminal. So, somebody can actually have the device in front of them. You can push payment through. You'll actually see within that video, I explain how to do that from a command line of just creating a checkout. And you could also see me as a robot, which is quite fun. But I'm happy to answer any other questions that anyone might have. Also, if anyone's looking to work at Square and you just are super interested in fintech and payments and everything like that, you'd always find our jobs over at square.jobs. And we actually have a lot of openings over there. I'll give everyone time to ask any questions that they want. But I guess like one more thing I'll just quickly show is in our documentation. Actually, that's going to take us to the main site. Let's go to our documentation. If you're ever confused on using anything with Square, these are really great resources for actually getting like the guides on how to make certain things work. If you have questions, I would heavily recommend going to our forums. And so that's just developer.square.com/forums. You can find it linked throughout our documentation site. This is the best way to connect with our support engineers, with us and others. There's a lot of useful information here on people who've had questions as they're building with Square. And then the other place that we have is our Slack channel. I'm always going to be recommending putting stuff on our forums here because the benefit of the forums is that you don't have to be signed in to start searching through them. So like if you have a question and you want it answered, you don't need to go through setting up an account. You can actually just go in here, you can search and say that I'm curious about something about payment form. We can just go ahead and search and you can see all of the things that other people have asked about payment form. But we also have a Slack community. So if you ever want to go to that, there's a link here in the forums, and that'll let you actually chat with people like myself, our support engineers who are in there Monday through Friday, and they're answering questions quite rapidly. It's not going to always necessarily be real time, but they'll usually get back to you pretty quick if you run into issues as you're building with Square. I guess one other thing that I'll plug, just because I am the maintainer of it. So if you want to see other projects that we have here on Glitch, give that a second to load. It's glitch.com/square. Probably going to see a couple of private projects in here. But here's one of our featured ones. So this is like using the React payment form, and this is just like our simple form. This might look kind of similar to other things that you've seen, but it has some like pretty neat little functionality here where it'll like show the card. Trying to think if we do that, you do MasterCard. And this actually simplifies like the whole UI part. And then we also have other really helpful examples using React, OAuth, or Checkout, or just like a full example. So yeah, you can always feel free to check that out at square.com/glitch or glitch.com/@square. Thank you. I'll delete my message. So yeah, that's our entire workshop for doing this. Happy to continue answering questions over in the Slack channel, and always feel free to reach out to us. We're available in the forums and Slack, like I mentioned. You could also follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/squaredev. Plug that here. So yeah, that pretty much covers it. If there's no other questions, I really appreciate you all attending this workshop, and I hope that you check out Square and build some things. And if you do, make sure that you tell us about it, because we'd love to hear about it. Awesome. I guess I probably should have had Twitch open. It's hard to like manage. I have like 100 windows open right now. Yes, but thank you so much, Steady Clean. I really hope that you enjoy this, and please do check out all of our other APIs. They're pretty fun to use. All right, thanks everyone. Oh yes, Bobby Lee, thank you so much for reminding me. We are also sponsoring the eCommerce prize, so that if you build something during this hackathon and you are featuring Square APIs or SDKs, you can be entered for a chance. As part of that competition, I think the details are on there, but we're awarding cash to all team members who win. So please do create something for the e-commerce category. Pretty simple requirements. You just got to use our APIs or SDKs exactly similar to how you saw. We already built it there. If you ever want to see other examples of this, we also did our own hackathon quite a while back, and we're really happy to see what everyone builds there. Awesome, Steady Queen. If you do build something, please tell us about it. Tell us in the forums, tell us on Slack. We'd love to hear about it. Awesome. Oh, I guess I forgot to cover these last tiny bits, but these are just older slides for everything to recap. But thankfully, Havenwood is shared, or Havenwood and Lich's Haven shared all of those wonderful links for y'all. Oh, yeah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here. Somebody can maybe keep me honest, but the prize is $100 per team member for up to 2 teams. But if I'm not correct on that, please check on the dev post information.